We are so excited to have Karen join us today as we continue our bravery series with a Superwoman Handbook. The idea of this segment was to find stories of bravery, whether that is finally going to the bathroom in public or moving to another country. As women, we have to dig deep and really find ourselves in brave moments to push forward. So I wanted to put together a collection of these stories for someone who may be in that moment at this time or someone who may be facing it in the future to kind of have a handbook to work from. So, Karen, I will send it over to you to tell us about your bravery moment.
Well, my bravery moment unfortunately started with a tragedy. And my daughter Carley was a sports reporter. She worked for ESPN, WDSU, the Saints, the Pelicans, Cleveland Browns. She was a freelance sports reporter. And she was getting quite well known. In fact, she was ready to sign on with the SEC or the NFL network. She had both offers on the table. And on December 28th, 2019, she was going to cover the LSU Tigers playing in the Peach Bowl for the semifinals. And interestingly enough, her father-in-law was actually the offensive coach for the LSU Tigers for that day, and his name was Steve Ensminger. And she got on the plane to go over there to cover the game, and the plane crashed, and she and four other people died. So at that moment, of course, our lives changed instantly. You talk
So I
about
do want to jump in there because I feel
uh-huh.
like that's the moment where people crack and they fall apart. How did you respond in that moment, and what advice would you have for someone should they be in that moment?
It's interesting because I was in the moment and I was sitting on the sofa with my husband and my priest at the time. I'm Catholic, and I looked at Father Tom and said, I don't want to hate God. I don't want to go through the why me stage. I love God and I need him. And he goes, he's going to give you the grace to get through it. And for some reason, those words just hit me. It was like 2 weeks after that, I was invited to go to a retreat, a woman's retreat. And it was during that time, it was a Catholic retreat. It was during that time that I was praying and I was looking at a picture of God with a little baby in his hand, and he was showing her a butterfly, and it was like he was showing her around heaven. And I said, God, are you telling me that you're showing Carley around heaven? And the thought struck in my mind, if the Virgin Mary can do it, so can I. And that thought really hit me because as Catholics, we tend to pray to Mary and we love Mary. But for me, it was always straight to God, straight to Jesus. And I really didn't talk to Mary so much, but it was like if I put a role model in your life, the Virgin Mary, she lost her son. And it was me, but she lost me and she went through the agonizing pain of losing a child. You're going to get through this. And so every time I got down and out, I thought to myself, okay, if the Virgin Mary can do it, so can I. Now, she obviously did it way better than I did. I don't want to, please don't think I'm calling myself the Virgin Mary because that's not true. But it gave me that strength. The next thing is Tom Rinaldi. He is the Shakespeare of sports. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the one that you don't. Well, anyway, he's the one that puts the stories together and puts the violin behind it, and you cry and you laugh. Well, he came to do a story about Carley and the national championship because at this time LSU was ready to play in the national championship with Joe Burrow and the Dream Team. And so we agreed to do the story because Carley and Tom Rinaldi worked together, and Carley always really enjoyed working with Tom. So the whole ESPN crew came in, and after it was over, I looked at him and I said, Tom, you have such a beautiful way with words, and I know you've written other books. Write Carly's story. I mean, Hollywood couldn't make this up. I mean, a plane crash, ESPN, she's a sports reporter. Her father in law was the offensive coach, going to the game, the semifinals. Now they're in the national championship. I mean, this is a story for Hollywood. And
Is
he,
it that they say like fact is always stranger than fiction?
yes,
That has, as I have had conversations with women about their brave moments, it's always been, that's what comes to my mind is you could not make this up.
right.
You could not write this if you hadn't lived it. And that's why I'm so grateful and so honored for your vulnerability to share this story because it's going to be a handbook. It's going to be a lesson for someone who is going through this. And I just,
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. And real quickly to finish the story of Tom Rinaldi, he looked at me and he said, "No, Karen, I'm not writing the story. It needs your voice." And he was right. It did need my voice, but that set me on a journey to write this book and interview over 100 people. And some of the people that I called, of course, was like, I talked to Michael Lombardi. I talked to, well, I interviewed and found out about Shaquille O'Neal. I talked to Taysom Hill. I talked to Jim Mora. I talked to, watched interviews with Sean Payton, watched interviews with Drew Brees on their press conferences. I mean, I set out and did 100 interviews. I talked to Michelle Tafoya, and I could go on and on and on. But I also talked to janitors that worked with her and cameramen that worked with her, and I set out on a journey to find out who Carley McCord was. Now you're probably saying to yourself, "She's your daughter. You should know everything." But at 17, you know a lot. But you wait till that 17-year-old goes
Hmm.
to college and then goes into the work world. Just think, does your mom know everything about you? Or does she know all your work relations and, all the people you have interacted with? She doesn't know that.
So
And
as you were going through that, was it cathartic for you to learn these, or was it sad because you hadn't heard them from her?
no, it was very cathartic because we were talking about writing and getting grief out because by the end of interviewing over 100 people, I I put my head down on the pillow one night and I said, "God, she was so loved." And I heard so many wonderful stories about how she was so energetic and so silly and so goofy and so funny and so raw and so talented and so kind. And I put my head one night on the pillow and I said, "God, I did my best. And you showed me that I did my best because she was a really good human. She wasn't without flaws." And you find that out in the book. Please don't think that when you pick up the book, you're going to find this little angel floating around because she did have her obstinate moments, but she was a good person and someone that is a role model to young people today.
I mean, she was loved. I think as a parent, if I had to think of what my goal is, as a parent, you think, okay, get them to college, get them a good job. Like you think of all these very first world tactical goals. You don't think I want to make sure they're loved. I want them to be the type of person that loves everyone and everyone loves them.
Yeah.
And for you to have discovered that on your own. I mean, it wasn't that you as a mom had manifested it. You had decided that she was loved by everyone based off the stories she told you. You discovered it on your own in real life. And that is just such a compliment. I love that.
And I did. Yeah, because when they're children, you go, you're gonna take dance lessons, and then you're gonna finish what you started, But I was blessed to know her for 30 years and to love her for 30 years. And, she was a joy to the family. But like I said, she gave us many a gray hair.
I love it. So, as you kind of through that journey, had you done something like this before? Had you written a book? Had you interviewed? Had you done something?
Well, believe it or not, I did write a book, an earlier book, and it was called Lessons of the Lilies. And that was a very brave moment as well because it dealt with infertility. And you got to remember back in the 1980s, infertility was not discussed like it
Mm-mm.
is today. Today, it's a major topic, and you would say, okay, yeah, that's a topic that's been explored. But back then, it was not. And my husband and I wrote the book, and we fell in love with the book. And, I'm really proud that he, along with myself, we agreed to do the book because men, they don't like to talk about infertility and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And it took a special man. And my husband is one of those special men. He really is. Now that doesn't mean that, some days I don't want to, just go, what? But he is a special man. And we've been married 46 years, but he had the bravery along with me to discuss infertility. And believe it or not, that book was a self-published book. We sold about 1,000 copies. And my OBGYN was the one who kind of encouraged us to do it. He says a lot of women would love to discuss this, but at the time it was very, very private. I mean, like IVF was not even, they called them test tube babies back then,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm sure that's not the term now, but it was very, very, very in the infancy stages of many things. So yes, I have done bravery things like this
I'm
before.
I'm just kind of just hovering in this moment right now that you wrote a book about basically the birth of a child and the loss of a child. I mean, that is just a 360. What was that when you realized, because you'd written that book before,
Correct.
um, and then you found yourself kind of on you knew, okay, I want to do this. How does that feel? How do you kind of quantify that in your mind?
I love that question because no one has asked me that. But I always say that I wrote the prequel to Only Rainbows, the Carley McCord story, because
Hmm.
you see Carley's birth in the very beginning ones. And my husband and I were married 9 years before we had children. I mean, now we didn't actually try for all 9 years, but it was a good uh, 4 to 5 years we tried. And yes, I look at that, and you know what? It's so interesting because I lost another baby. I was 6 months pregnant, and it's all in the lessons of the lilies. And I lost that baby, and when I lost Carly, I looked back and said, God, you were preparing me to lose Carly because it was interesting. I went through the major grief process when I lost the baby at 6 months. And my husband was the rock who just supported me. And then when Carly passed away, had to be the rock for him, if that makes any sense, because, daddy's love for their daughters are just different than mommy's love. Tracy thought I needed to protect her and everything, and so he had the struggles with that. So it was like God gave me the strength. God gave Tracy the strength for that birth and that death, and then God gave me the strength for this death and this birth. And so is my family stronger from it? Oh yes. I have a son and a daughter and Tracy, and they all supported Only Rainbows. They supported the writing of this book. However, I will say Kaylee, my oldest daughter, has yet to read the full book. Tracy has not read the book yet. And Carson has read the book. So it's kind of like it has to be in their time. And I very much respect that.
Yeah, this definitely feels like a journey that someone needs to go on. You didn't have the choice of when you went on it, you had to live it in real time. But I can see absolutely needing to be in the right place to just digest this. And in some ways, people say, it's not real if it's not in writing. And so I can see, I would feel that it maybe wasn't real. But if I read it in writing, now it's real. I think that
Yes.
would be my hesitation to read it if I was that close.
And that's an interesting concept because I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction. But when I wrote Only Rainbows, I wrote it by hand, believe it or not. I did not write it by computer. Well, of course it got on computer, but my first copies were big stacks of notebooks and I'd write it by hand because I always said brain, heart, hand. And when I wrote it by hand, Jillian, I was writing so quickly, like God was guiding me to write it. And you could see the big globs of tears on the page. But the real, oh, look at this, Carly's going to pop up right here. I don't know if you see it. We'll swipe it up. Here we go.
I
It
love
happens
it.
all the time. Anyway, but as I wrote it, I said, I am going to write it because so many people gave me books and they helped me realize the moment that I was in, that realization of it was in writing. And one of the best things I could suggest to people is that, how people go, oh, can I help you anyway? What can I do to help you? And there is one way, and I don't mean for this to be a shameless plug, but give them a book. Only Rainbows is one of those books, but I read The Shack. That's another really
Oh,
good book.
yeah. Oh,
That
that one. Wow. I'm now smelling pancakes, or was it waffles? Which was it?
waffles.
Well, yeah,
Yes.
now I'm smelling those. Yeah.
Yes. And it was, because, God cooked for him and everything. And, the shack was the one that was one of the ones that really, I just kept earmarking and underlining and everything. Well, I hope Only Rainbows could be that gift to someone, and, and I will say when someone is grieving, if you say, I wonder what I could bring them, bring them a book, bring them Only Rainbows or bring them The Shack or bring them, whatever their comfort zone is and, that sort of thing, because books do make it more of a reality. Yeah. But writing a book makes you very vulnerable,
And
you
I
know?
like the book suggestion because it's not like counseling. If you go to counseling, you have to do it in real time with someone else. A book you
Mhm.
can read at your own pace. You can
Mhm.
take a pause and
Yes.
come back to it an hour later. You can put some notes in it. So I really do like that suggestion because it's a journey you can go on at your own pace, but yet it's also kind of a guided tour. You're not
Right.
just loose out there crying because that's what I would be doing. I would just be walking around my house crying with no structure. So I really do love that suggestion.
Yeah, and I did walk around crying with no structure on many days as well. You have to do both. But yeah, the book does give you some purpose and it gives you a focus point. Yeah.
So how did you handle that part? Kind of like the permission to grieve, to move on. Did you give yourself any boundaries with that, or did you just
Yes.
kind of just roll with it?
No, I did. And that was, you got to remember when Carly died, 2019, December 28th, 2020 was COVID. And so it was just god awful for our family because we couldn't see anybody, do anything. My mom was in a nursing home dying. I needed my mom, but I couldn't see her. And it was just such an isolating experience. It truly, truly was. And I was meeting with my counselor over Zoom, just like you and I are doing it. And, it works, but, it's still not that personal togetherness and that sort
Hmm.
of thing. So I can remember reading in one of my books because the books helped me because human contact was very limited. And I can
Hmm.
remember reading in books, let yourself grieve for 5 hours a day. Then let yourself grieve for 3 hours a day. And so
I
then
see. Okay.
you just kind of took it step by step because when it first happens, you grieve 24 hours a day. You just
Hmm.
do. You just can't get out of that. You have to process it and think about it and work through it. And then you believe it or not, 5 hours sounds like a lot, but that was a big victory when I hit the 5 hour mark. And then it was 3 hours. Then it worked down to 15 minutes. And then it worked down to 5 minutes, but I was writing the book. So it never really got down to five
Hmm.
minutes. And I'm going to be honest with you. At any given time, she's on my mind. You know what I'm saying? At any given time, she's on my mind. But another thing that I really felt helped me a lot was people letting me talk about Carley.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, the book lets me talk about Carley as well. And that brings me comfort because sometimes people will say, so how are you doing? But they don't want you to mention the person that just died. Well, you just want to try to process this and you do want to mention it. It's more than not that you want to talk about it as opposed to not talking about it. You know?
I can see that, and I can also see how for those who are listening who may be on the other end, they didn't lose someone, but they're trying to offer support to someone who did. You can feel like you just what do I say? Do I like it? All just feels wrong. So I love the suggestion of giving a book. I love kind of the suggestions you're giving of how to be a good friend, during that time.
Yeah.
Kind of from that, though, I'm still kind of curious, going back to the stories that you learned, what was the one that surprised you the most that she hadn't told you about? But yet, when you were interviewing
Oh,
her friends and the janitor, what one were you like, girl?
oh, there were so many, but this one was okay. It's kind of silly, and I told it last night. I did a speech talk last night. I told it last night. She was in Miss Louisiana, and she was a pageant girl by duress. And when you read the book, you'll understand what I mean by that. She kind of did it for the scholarship money, and she liked the competition. Did she like being a pageant girl? I don't think so, and that has nothing to do against pageant women
Mm-hmm.
because it taught her finishing school. But it was just kind of interesting. But one of the interesting stories was that she was competing for Miss Louisiana for the last time. It was her very last time, and she was first runner up twice, and she would call it first loser twice. And her roommate last night was there, and she was her biggest competitor, and she wound up being Miss Louisiana, not that year, but and Carley wound up being first loser, so as she put it. And so anyway, she had told me a story about how they were competing for Miss Louisiana, and she told Lacey, she said, Lacey, I'm going to go to bed tonight early. I'll see you in the morning. I'm not trying to be rude, but I have an interview. And she goes, you have an interview? You've been on an interview all day. And she goes, yeah, but I have another interview with the Cleveland Browns. And, and so she walked out after the interview while she was in Miss Louisiana, in Miss Louisiana week. She walked out and she looked at Lacey and she said, I'm going to the NFL. And so we had no idea that this was culminating at this point of the journey. And so when she got into top 10, we cheered in the audience and everything. When she didn't get into top 5, we were like, what? She was first runner up last time. And she was all excited. And we're like, why is she all excited? Because she didn't get in the top 10. Well, because she knew she was going into the NFL. And, she got off the stage and pretty much just a little time lapse. And she said, Mom and Dad, I'm going to Cleveland. And we went, Cleveland? People tell you New York, but Cleveland? And she goes, yeah, I'm going to the NFL. I said, you're not disappointed you didn't win Miss Louisiana? And she turned to me and said, Mom, wearing a crown in the NFL would be quite silly. So that was
that she just rolled with it. She just looked at, you know what, that chapter's done. We're moving to this chapter, and we're going to find the positive. Like I love that.
Yeah, and how she got into the Cleveland Browns was a very interesting story. And it also was one that I really didn't know the whole fact about. And I'm going to tell you why. We always thought, we knew a little bit of the backstory because Carley was graduated in criminal justice and she was going to go into law school. And the thing of it is when she went into the NFL and worked for the Cleveland Browns, she interned as a sports reporter, but her actual job was she was a scout in the NFL. She was a character scout in the NFL, and she couldn't tell us that because she could tell us she was a scout, but we didn't know really.
Love
We
it.
we really didn't know that she was like a character scout. She would actually go to spring break and watch the
Bet some
players
stories happen
more
there.
and ethics, yes. And she was one of, if not the first character scout. She was very undercover, and we didn't know the undercover work because she
And
couldn't
so
tell us
this,
that.
did she tell you this later after the job was done?
After the job was done, she kind of still told us, but she really didn't until, and we kind of suspected something when she passed away. A lot of the NFL teams were doing a moment of silence for her. Now, I understood the Saints because she worked for the Saints. I understood Cleveland because she worked for Cleveland. But I didn't understand like South Carolina or, the Philadelphia Eagles. And it wasn't until I realized that, and I interviewed Michael Lombardi, who now
Mm-hmm.
works for North Carolina, but he was the GM for the Cleveland Browns. And I interviewed him, and she goes, "Oh, yeah, she was very well known in the NFL." Had no idea. Had no idea.
I love that. Like,
Yeah.
I love stories like that. And another thing as a mom that had made you so proud that,
Yeah. Yeah.
she was so recognized and so renowned and so respected.
And yeah, and also she was very brave. I mean, she moved to Cleveland knowing two people, maybe. She knew her a pageant sister that she competed with for 1 week, stayed with them. Then she got an apartment, got her roommate on Craigslist. That's a whole nother story. We're like, Craigslist. Tell mom, don't worry, the NFL, they checked him out. And, she really did things with the faith of God. She really did believe she was going to succeed no matter what she did. And she lived fast. And a lot of people said she lived so much of life in 30 years. And I said, yeah, she did. She lived fast. And I do believe she realized she didn't have long. Instinctively, she didn't have long. And she lived fast, and she lived quickly, and it was always on a timeline. And yeah, she was very brave. That was that. I mean, she would have been one of the perfect people to have interviewed on your podcast.
Well, I'm glad that you kind of made that segue because I was just about to say, and I appreciate you sharing your bravery stories. But if you like her, what would be her bravery story? What legacy would she leave for girls to hear?
That's really a cool question because she was very much a girl's girl. And what I mean by that is she supported women. She always lived by the motto of you always fix another girl's crown. And she did this so beautifully, women in sports. She supported women in sports. Anytime someone wanted to stand on the sidelines and go and mentor with her, she would always have a mentor with her. And she was just never like afraid that, oh my gosh, one day they would take my job or, do this. She was always, and that's one thing I learned with the interviews as well, is people always would say, like Mike Detillier and Matt Moscona, which are big names around Louisiana, they would always say, man, she always had, you know, a mentor with her. Lynn Rollins would say, "Who are you going to meet? Who's going to be with you today?" Because she always believed in giving back, and she always believed women should always support women and not be in competition with women. And I think she really I hope she learned that from us, and I think she learned that with the pageant world as well, because some of the pageant girls, pageant women are either very close and they support each other and they really support each other, or they are, in competition. And for example, one competition, her swimsuit was, destroyed, and she just would always say, Why would they destroy my swimsuit? They're competing against themselves. They're getting better on their own, not to sabotage me. And so I think she learned that in the pageant world. And like I said, the pageant world was very, very good for Carley because she learned the ins and outs, and she learned through the organization that women can support women and be happy for women.
Love that. And that takes a level of bravery right there, because it can make you feel so vulnerable. As you're advancing, I think there's a natural inclination to think that because the mountain gets smaller as you get to the top, that there's less room for everyone at the top. That's just kind of a natural, especially in her industry. You don't see a lot of women doing what she's doing. So I could imagine her just natural protectiveness of wanting to protect her top of the mountain, but to realize that, life is always better shared. And if you can, turn around and help the next person in line behind you, then great. They build on your experience. The next person builds on the experienced person before. And that definitely does resonate to just the security and the confidence that you instilled in her, just
Yeah.
through your parenting and through her life, because it could very easily have gone the other way, if
Very.
the wrong person, yeah.
And I will say, I interviewed Laura Rutledge, and she is a sportscaster, gorgeous. She was Miss Florida. And I've interviewed Michelle Tafoya, who I just, even though we've never met, we've done podcasts, and I consider her a dear friend, even though, I don't want to give the image of, we go have coffee together, but I could call her right now and she would respond. And Erin Andrews, and all three of those women worked with Carley and shared their love for Carley and shared their love for each other, that bond for each other. So, a lot of those women are very much women in sports, and they do support each other because they have to in some respects.
I love that. And the last kind of question I have for you is, tell us a story about Carley that's one that when you see her name, when you hear it spoken, what story, maybe she's two and she's, doing something silly, or she's learning to ride a bike. What story comes to your heart first when you think of her?
Okay, it is so funny. And do you want a memory or do you want a story? Because there's a
Either
story
one.
that goes, okay, I'm going to throw the story out, and then if you want to redirect me, you can. After she passed away, of course, it's always in the public eye. And, public tragedy is everybody sees it on television because it was all over television. It was all over the news, the Today Show, ESPN, news reporters outside our house and everything. And everybody sees that part of the story, but nobody sees the back end of the story, where a public tragedy where the family has to deal with, funerals and the sorrow and the pain and picking out urns and picking out reception halls to have the final dinner, and putting the YouTube together so that she could have a little film clip. Nobody sees that, and writing the memorial. That's all behind the scenes, and it's just so overwhelming. Well, we went to go make arrangements for her funeral, and the last thing we had to do was go into what they called the cremation room, which was called the urn room. And because of the nature of the accident, that's the way we chose to go. And we were standing there. I promise you, this does have a happy, it's not all sad. And we're looking, and all of a sudden, I see this pink urn. I am talking about this bow with wires out and this non-traditional cylinder. And I stopped in my tracks, and I felt Carley. I felt her going, this is it. And Tracy, my husband, goes, let's look at a few more, and so he's taking me, and we look at the angels and look at this pretty cross, and the lady from the funeral home is going, look at this one's beautiful. And I said, no, this is it. And and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said, is this one popular? She goes, no, ma'am, this one is on discount because no one has ever bought it. And she goes, and I looked at her, and Carley was a discount queen. She loved discount makeup, discount clothes. She always looked for the bargain. I said, this is it. And she goes, oh, okay. And the wire was out. She goes, well, I'll fix the bow. And I looked at it and I laughed and I told Tracy, this one is it, because Carley was raw. Carley
Mm-hmm.
was funny. Carley was goofy. Carley was that image. She didn't want anything reverent. She wanted
I love
silliness.
this.
And so, the whole day when I kept looking at the urn going, you just played a joke on all of us because you're telling us you are fine, you are there, you are having the time of your life, and you are on another journey that you're just going to love every minute of it. And I always say, and this is a line from one of her dear friends, Matt Moscona, but he said, Karen, she had a microphone on Earth. She has a skyline up there. And we see rainbows all the time. We see signs from her all the time. I mean, not a day can go by without Carley popping up. You know how we just did the thing and
Mm-hmm.
that little message? She will pop up just everywhere to say, hi, I see y'all.
I love that, and I love the place that you're in now with the peace with this, while still maintaining and holding the memory. That's definitely something that I've not had to go through. And I know it's a
What
rare
you have
like.
to do, it's raw. It's raw, you know.
But you have definitely been a great model and inspiration today to share this and just kind of model what it can be like on the other side
Mhm,
of all of this. You know, going back from the day you heard about the accident to where you are today, and the journey in between that can be honest and raw, but also beautiful
mhm.
and peacefully. And that's the energy I'm feeling from you, and I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a very peaceful thing. Although I will say, I don't want to make it too easy looking because it's still, there are some days that tears will still run down my face. Or there'll be some days I'll just tell my husband, please hold me. I just need a minute. And, I'm sure I'll live that with the rest of my life because it's a new normal. It's a new normal. My
Yeah.
family, when we get together, I look at my family and go, it's so much smaller. And, you just things like that. But you do learn to adapt. You have to live for your other children and you have to live for the other people around you. And can I leave you with one more story, or did we go over?
Please, please. No, we're good.
I'm
Please.
gonna I'm gonna leave you with one more story that I always like to tell, and I tell in my talks. In 2020, you have to have a counselor. I mean, you don't have to, but I don't know how people do this without a grief counselor trying to guide you. And we had to do it, unfortunately, through Zoom. But I'll never forget my counselor, Vanessa. She said something so wise to me. And she said, Karen, she said, what was the worst day of your life? And I looked at her and I'm like, you know what? She goes, no, stay with me. And I said, December 28th, 2019. And she said, what would you have done differently? And I said, and she says, what would you have changed? And I said, I would have slashed her tires. I would have, banged in her windshield. I would have stood in front of her car to get into the car so she wouldn't have even gotten on the plane or missed the plane. Or if I would have stood in front of the plane, I would have hung from the wings. I would have done anything. She goes, ah, so you would have played God. And I said, no, I would have played mom. And she goes, no, you would have played God. She says, because don't you think God could have changed that if he wanted to? And I said, yes. And she goes, Karen, it wasn't yours to change. It was her time. And when she told me that, deep, deep, deep in my soul, I knew she was right. It was her time. She had fulfilled her mission on earth, and she did it with such grace and ease and such drama. We laughed. We said, Carley, you would have died. You would have been the one who died in an airplane crash all over national television. You would have loved it, because it was such drama.
It was her
So,
style.
yes, yes. So, anyway, so that's my story, and I hope you've
And
enjoyed.
so I'm so glad that you shared that last bit because and I'm about to cry now. I mean, I think that
Right,
resonates
every time I
because
talk.
so often I just recently went through something personal and I had a very similar feeling of what you're describing. And the way that you put it, it would have been playing God to change that outcome and that trajectory and to trust that there's a purpose, a bigger purpose for why something so horrible would happen.
Right.
That it has, a rainbow ending. So I
Mm-hmm.
really do appreciate you sharing that because that's such a human reaction.
It
That's
is.
a human desire to just stop it, prevent it, erase it, go back. And so I just really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. And yeah, it's in God's hands. And if you trust and you believe, it's all going to be okay. That doesn't mean you're not going to feel the feelings, but it's going to be okay.
So where can folks continue to follow your story? Where can they find you online and on Amazon and all that good stuff?
Oh, well, we are on Amazon right now and we're on Barnes and Noble. We hit the bestseller banner. So I did get one of those bestseller types of things. And I have enjoyed watching the sales of the books. I've been doing book talks. I'm going to be on the circuit and signing and everything. And, maybe just one day you might see it on a television show or something like that, and, it's a work in process, and we're going to just have to see where God wants to take it. Wherever God wants to take it, that's where it's going to be. But sales have been very good. Feedback has been very good. I mean, I have gotten feedback from strangers, saying thank you. It has helped me. It's been rich. And like I said, I wish I could take credit for the beautiful words, but I pick it up and read it and go, God, you did a really good job.
I love it. Well, we'll put all these links in the show notes so folks can find your book and follow you online and just continue to hear and share Carley's story. I appreciate your bravery today and your vulnerability to decide. I know each time you tell your story, you're reliving it a little bit.
Hmm.
So I appreciate kind of that you were willing to relive it
Yeah,
for us
but no,
today to
thank you
have
for
this.
the gift to do that. Thank you for giving me that gift.
Wonderful. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.